In Death Valley, there is a place where the Earth seems to have dropped below its own limits. A white basin stretches into the distance like a frozen ocean, but there is no water here, only salt, heat, silence, and a floor that lies 282 feet below sea level, the lowest point in North America. It looks impossible the moment you see it, because your brain knows what sea level means. And yet here, in the middle of one of the harshest landscapes in America, the land sinks lower than the ocean and stays dry anyway. In eastern California, inside the vast trench of Death Valley, there is a place that feels less like a desert and more like a contradiction. The ground is blinding white. The basin is wide and flat enough to feel endless. Dark mountains rise around it like walls. And somewhere in that silence, one fact changes the way you see everything. This place is below sea level. Not just low, not just sunken, below sea level. That phrase is what gives Badwater Basin its power, because the moment people hear it, the same question appears almost automatically. If this land is lower than the ocean, why is it not underwater? That question works because Badwater Basin attacks one of our most basic assumptions about geography. We grow up treating sea level like a boundary, as if it is one of the planet's final rules. Water belongs above it, oceans define it, and land that drops beneath it sounds like a mistake, something unstable, flooded, temporary, or broken. But Badwater Basin does not look temporary. It looks ancient. It sits there in absolute stillness, bright with salt, dry under brutal sun, as if the earth itself has been holding a secret depression in its skin for far longer than human intuition can handle. The visual shock is immediate. It looks like a place where the planet should have given way. Instead, it hardened. And that is what makes this landscape so cinematic. It does not overwhelm you with one dramatic object. It overwhelms you with the quiet violence of the idea. A basin below sea level should feel wet, dark, and heavy. Badwater feels the opposite. It is pale, dry, reflective, and exposed. The salt crust catches light in a way that makes the surface look unreal, almost like snow from a distance, until the context reasserts itself and reminds you that this is one of the hottest, driest environments in North America. The contradiction is the story. Badwater Basin feels impossible because everything about its appearance argues with the meaning of its elevation. To understand why this place sits below sea level, you have to step back from the salt and look at the valley itself. Death Valley is part of a much larger geologic story. A great basin shaped by tectonic stretching and faulting, where the land between mountain ranges dropped downward over immense spans of time. The valley became a trough, and Badwater Basin became one of its deepest expressions. This was not a hole suddenly punched into the ground. It was a depression built slowly by the earth pulling, cracking, sinking, and rearranging itself over geologic time. That is why the basin does not feel like a crater or a collapse. It feels structural. It belongs to the architecture of the valley. But that still leaves the more unsettling part of the mystery. If the basin is that low, why is it not filled by the sea? The answer is that Badwater Basin is enclosed. The ocean does not simply pour into Death Valley, because this landscape is separated from it by other land and mountain systems. Water can collect here after rare storms, and shallow lakes can temporarily appear, but they do not last. The climate is too dry, the heat too relentless, and the evaporation too extreme. Water comes in, but it leaves by sky, not by outlet. The liquid disappears. The minerals do not. And that is where the white crust begins. Over time, rainwater dissolves minerals from surrounding rocks and carries them downhill into the basin. Temporary pools and shallow lakes form after storm events. especially in the lowest parts of the valley. Then the water evaporates, again and again, year after year, age after age. Each cycle leaves more minerals behind. That is why Badwater Basin is not just low, it is coated. What looks empty is actually the residue of countless vanished waters. Badwater is a basin where absence becomes visible. That is also what gives the ground its strange geometry. Walk out far enough from the roadside, and the salt surface begins to organize itself into large polygon patterns, the famous shapes that make Badwater Basin look almost designed. These formations are not decoration. They are part of the basin's slow conversation between water, evaporation, salt growth, and surface tension. The result is a landscape that feels both mathematical and lifeless, as if nature stopped trying to be organic and instead began arranging itself into hard white code. It is one of the rare places where the ground does not just look harsh. It looks intelligent in a cold, indifferent way. And that is why Badwater Basin hits so hard visually. It does not look like a place where life should begin. It looks like a place where life should retreat. The white salt flat stretches under extreme heat. The dark mountains hold the horizon in place. The air itself often feels empty of softness. There is no forest here to soften the edges, no running water to ease the silence, no visual comfort to distract you from the fact that this is a depression in the earth, exposed under punishing sky. It feels as though the planet took one of its deepest wounds and let the sun preserve it. What makes the place even more unsettling is the scale of contrast around it. In Death Valley, extremes sit shockingly close to one another. Not far from the lowest point in North America, high mountains rise dramatically above the basin floor. That vertical range compresses the landscape into something that feels exaggerated, almost fictional. The valley is not content to be merely low. It places deep basin and towering elevation into the same visual system. That is part of why Badwater never feels like just a flat. It feels like the bottom of something enormous, a floor beneath walls, a point where the land has been lowered so far that everything around it becomes part of the pressure. Then there is the name, Badwater. Even that contributes to the atmosphere. It suggests contamination, rejection, something undrinkable and unforgiving. And the place lives up to it emotionally. This is not a welcoming basin. It is a place that turns ordinary expectations against you. White ground that is not snow. A basin below sea level that is not ocean. Flatness that does not relax the eye. Silence that does not feel peaceful. Badwater Basin takes familiar elements and empties them of comfort. What remains is a landscape that feels less like scenery and more like a condition. This is where the impact on modern life becomes impossible to ignore, because Badwater Basin is now more than a geological extreme. It is a symbol of Earth at its most physically counterintuitive. It drives tourism, photography, science education, viral travel content, and modern fascination with landscapes that look impossible without CGI. At the same time, it reminds people how fragile even a harsh place can be. The salt crust is delicate, the patterns can be damaged, and the surface that looks permanent can be scarred by careless movement. So Badwater represents a very modern tension. We want access to the most surreal places on Earth, but the more we chase them, the more careful we have to become. And there is something deeper happening beneath all of that. Badwater Basin changes the meaning of below itself. Usually, below means hidden, buried, or unreachable. But here, below is exposed. Below is glowing in full sunlight. Below is visible for miles. That is what makes the place stick in your mind. It forces you to confront the idea that the Earth's deepest expressions are not always underground. Sometimes they are right in front of us, open to the sky, stripped bare by heat and time. Sometimes the strangest thing about a place is not what rises from the land, but what sinks and stays there. So why is this place below sea level? Because Death Valley is part of a vast tectonic basin where the land dropped over geologic time. Because the basin is enclosed, the sea never simply flooded it. Because rare water collects, evaporates and leaves minerals behind, and because extreme dryness preserved that process until a white salt world formed at the bottom of one of the harshest valleys in North America. But emotionally, that answer never feels complete. Badwater still looks like a contradiction made physical. It still feels like a place the Earth should not have allowed. And maybe that is the real power of Badwater Basin. Not that it sits below sea level, but that it makes that fact feel emotionally unstable. You understand the words, but the landscape keeps resisting them. The basin stays dry, the salt stays bright, the floor stays low. And somewhere between the science and the silence, the place begins to feel less like a desert attraction, and more like a reminder that the planet has never cared whether its designs feel intuitive to us. In Death Valley, the Earth does not just break expectations. It leaves them out in the sun until they crystallize. If Badwater Basin made you feel like even the lowest places on Earth can look impossible, like this video and subscribe to Off the Map. Because next, we are heading to a lake that looks like someone spilled an entire spectrum into the water. Grand Prismatic Spring, Yellowstone, Wyoming. Why is this lake every color at once? And when you see a pool glowing with bands of blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, all at the same time, the question will not be whether it is beautiful. It will be how something on Earth can look that unreal.